The time it takes to learn a language is highly variable. Some languages are more similar to your native language than others. If you speak English and want to learn Spanish, it's going to be much quicker than learning Japanese or Korean. And there are statistics to back this up. According to research, it takes around 480 hours of study time to reach fluency in Spanish, 720 hours in French, German, or Italian, and 1,100 hours in Chinese. However, at the same time, we all know that most people do want to actually sit down and count the number of hours they spend learning their target language. So if you don't know how many hours you have already put in, how do you know when you reach fluency? It's difficult to say, because everyone's different, and we all have different ways of learning. However, there are some basic guidelines. The Foreign Service Institute has created benchmarks to estimate the average amount of time required for someone with a bachelor's degree to learn a language to a professional working proficiency level. The time they estimate varies from 480 hours for Tagalog to over 2,000 hours for Mandarin Chinese. This is where things get interesting. While some languages take as little as 600 hours to reach fluency, you can also just watch videos about how to learn the language for 1,000 hours. And that should achieve the same effect, honestly. Well, let's unpack this. What does it mean to learn a language? What is fluency? What is the best way to learn a language? How many hours should you be studying per day? That's what we're going to discuss in today's episode. If you're new here, I'm a PhD student in applied linguistics, which means I study how people learn second languages. I've been learning languages for over 10 years now. In this series, I share my learnings with you guys, so you can start learning your target language faster and more effectively. So make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications. With that said, let's begin. First, let me explain what I mean by the title of this episode. When people talk about how long it takes to learn a language, they usually refer to reaching a B1 level of proficiency. A B1 level means you can understand ideas in more technical texts, communicate fairly easily with native speakers without too much effort, and can respond to questions and conversations without having to stop and think too much. Basically, it means you can function quite well in your target language. However, this is not the only way to define fluency, and there is no universally agreed upon definition of fluency. Some people consider fluency to be the ability to use a language perfectly, like a native speaker. However, it's impossible for most non-native speakers to reach this level of proficiency because you have to be brought up in the environment where the language is spoken to be able to use the language like a native speaker. Native speakers use expressions, slang words and phrases that they learned unconsciously and non-consciously because they were surrounded by them. They can also process the language faster and recognize patterns much quicker than non-native speakers because, again, they were exposed to their native language before they were conscious of even using language. So if speaking like a native speaker is not a realistic goal, then what should our goal be? This question doesn't have an easy answer, and each person has different language goals. Some people want to read literature in their target language, while others want to be able to travel and order food in a restaurant. For some people, learning a language is just a hobby, and for others, it's part of their job. Whatever your reason for learning a language, the important thing is that you set realistic goals for yourself and evaluate your progress based on those goals. This brings us to the next question, which is how do you measure fluency? As I mentioned earlier, there are no universal measures of fluency, but we can come up with some general guidelines. You can base your evaluation criteria on your language skills, such as your ability to understand listening texts, speak with native-like pronunciation, write error-free essays, etc., or you can take a standardized test as a measure of your proficiency. For example, the IELTS exam includes 4 sections: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. The higher your score is in each section, the higher your overall proficiency level is. However, taking an exam may not be ideal if your ultimate goal is to use the language in real-life situations, such as traveling or communicating with friends, because exam-style questions are often very different from real-life communication. If that is your goal, you might be better off focusing on conversational skills rather than taking a standardized test. Okay, now let's answer the next question, which is what is the best way to learn a language? The answer to this question depends on the individual and what their goals are. For example, if you want to learn a language for traveling, you might focus on learning everyday vocabulary and expressions. However, if you want to learn a language for academic purposes, you might need to focus on learning more formal language and writing skills. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to learning a language, but I will give you some tips that may help you find the best way to learn a language for you. First, find out your learning style. Do you learn better by seeing, hearing, or doing? This can help you figure out what kind of activities you should focus on when learning a language. For example, if you are a visual learner, you might prefer watching videos or using flashcards to learn new vocabulary. On the other hand, if you are an auditory learner, you might prefer listening to podcasts or practicing your speaking skills with a friend. Another thing you should consider is the amount of time you have available to study. If you are short on time, you might need to focus on learning the most common vocabulary and grammar rules. And if you have more time available, you can focus on learning more advanced language structures and expanding your vocabulary. Also, if possible, try to immerse yourself in the language as much as you can. This could mean watching TV shows or movies in your target language, listening to music, or even changing the language settings on your phone. The more you expose yourself to the language, the more comfortable you will become using it. Lastly, don't forget to practice your target language regularly. One of the biggest mistakes language learners make is that they don't practice consistently. If you want to improve your language skills, you need to practice regularly, whether it's through conversation with a friend, writing in a journal, or simply shadowing along to a video. Consistency is key to improving your language skills. Okay, now that we've covered what it means to learn a language, how do we measure fluency and what the best way to learn a language is? Let's get to the final question. How many hours do I need to study every day? The answer to this question really depends on the individual and how quickly you want to learn the language. There is no right answer, but I can offer some suggestions. If you want to reach a B1 level of proficiency in 1 year, you would need to study around 2 to 3 hours a day. But if you want to reach a B1 level in 6 months, you would need to study around 4 to 5 hours a day. Keep in mind that these are just estimates, and your actual needs may vary. If you want to learn a language quickly, you will need to commit to studying regularly. However, if you are short on time, you can still make progress by studying for shorter periods of time. It all depends on your personal circumstances and goals. I hope you found this video helpful. Let me know what questions you have in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of my videos. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye.